Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something really interesting about early British America. There's this common picture, isn't there, that all these first colonies were basically the same.
Yeah, sort of a monolithic idea.
Exactly. But we're here to challenge that.
Right.
Our mission today is to unpack how incredibly different factors, I mean, everything from the soil itself to what the settlers were actually hoping for, created wildly different societies. We're looking at 1607 to about 1754.
And from a geographic perspective, our goal is really to explain how and why the environment, but also other things, shaped how these diverse colonies grew and spread out.
It's not just what happened.
No, it's about the forces underneath it all, understanding those drivers.
So get ready. We'll take you from, tobacco boom towns driven by profit
The Chesapeake.
to these Puritan family farms in the north, and then these really diverse grain economies. But interestingly, we'll also find a kind of hidden connection linking them.
Despite all the differences.
Okay, let's dive in. First up, the Chesapeake in North Carolina, hot, fertile land,
Yeah.
and the driving force. One thing, really,
Tobacco.
tobacco. Hugely labor-intensive right from the get-go.
Yeah.
And this all starts with Jamestown, 1607, the very first permanent British colony in North America.
And it's crucial, I think, to understand the model behind Jamestown. It wasn't like the Spanish colonies funded by the king or queen. No, this was the joint stock company. Think private investors pooling their money.
Ah, like venture capital today almost.
Sort of, yeah. Sharing the risk, hoping for a big profit, and that profit motive, that really shaped everything.
But profit wasn't immediate, was it?
Yeah.
The first couple of years sound absolutely brutal.
Oh, horrific. They were digging for gold and silver, building forts.
And planting food?
Well, partly. It led to famine, terrible diseases. There are even accounts of cannibalism. It was desperate.
Was that just the gold fever, or other factors too?
It's complex. Yes, the focus on gold diverted effort, but they were also struggling with unfamiliar farming, harsh conditions, and often very difficult relations with the Native Americans. Their whole purpose kind of clashed with the reality on the ground.
Hard to even imagine.
Yeah.
But then things shifted. 1612. John Rolfe.
Right. He figures out how to cure a type of tobacco that becomes hugely popular back in England.
And that basically saved the colony.
You could argue that, yeah. It gave them a viable economic base.
Okay, so tobacco takes off. Who's doing the work?
Initially, primarily indentured servants.
These are the people who trade, 7 years of labor for passage?
Roughly, yes. 7 years, give or take, in exchange for the trip over, and then they'd be free.
But there's huge demand for tobacco. It needs land, lots of land.
Exactly. And that meant constantly pushing westward onto American Indian lands.
Which inevitably leads to conflict.
Yes, increasing tension, violence. And when the colonists asked Governor William Berkeley for help, he didn't really do much for the frontier farmers.
So the farmers felt ignored and under attack.
Precisely. And that frustration boiled over in 1676 with Bacon's Rebellion.
Nathaniel Bacon, he leads this group of angry farmers, indentured servants.
Right, attacking Native Americans first, but then they actually turned on Governor Berkeley's own plantations.
Wow. So attacking the establishment itself.
It was chaotic, didn't last long, but the consequence, that was huge.
What was the big takeaway for the elites?
What's fascinating here is the reaction of the wealthy planters. Bacon's rebellion terrified them.
The prospect of angry, armed, poor white men and former servants uniting.
Exactly. They suddenly saw indentured servants not just as labor, but as a potential threat. And they started looking for a different, a more controllable labor source.
That leads them to
enslaved Africans. This is a critical pivot point. It wasn't just about finding workers. It was a conscious decision by the elite to reshape their labor force and, by extension, their entire society towards chattel slavery. A really profound shift.
Okay, let's shift gears completely. From the Chesapeake's profit focus, let's go north. New England. Very different picture.
Totally different. Small towns, family farms.
A mixed economy, right. Farming, but also commerce, trade.
Yes. And the settlers themselves were different. The first wave, the Pilgrims, arrive in 1620. But then comes a much larger group, the Puritans.
And they were Protestants who weren't happy with the Church of England.
Correct. But here's a common misconception we should probably clear up.
Oh.
The Pilgrims, specifically, they didn't primarily come for religious freedom in the way we often think.
Really? I thought that was the whole story.
Well, they'd already left England and settled in Holland for a while. and they had religious tolerance there.
Ah, okay. So why leave Holland?
Economics, mostly. They were farmers, and they found it really hard to make a living in the urban environment of Holland. So coming to America was, in large part, an economic decision, too.
So it's more complex than just fleeing persecution.
Hmm.
Economics played a big role for the Pilgrims.
Definitely intertwined. And another key difference from, say, Jamestown, New Englanders tended to migrate as family units.
Not just single men looking for quick riches.
Right. They came to establish a community, a society built around families and, family-based economies.
They had a rough start too, though, didn't they? Disease hit them hard initially.
Oh, yes. That first winter was brutal. About half of them died from fever and disease. But they persisted.
And eventually built a pretty successful society based on that mix of farming and trade.
Yes, quite distinct from the Chesapeake model.
Okay, so we have the profit-driven South, the faith and family North. What about the colonies in between? The middle colonies.
Ah, yes. New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware. These are fascinating because they become this sort of melting pot.
How so?
Well, they developed a really strong export economy, mainly based on cereal crops, wheat, corn.
The stuff you can ship easily. And the geography helped.
Absolutely. Look at New York and New Jersey coastlines, lots of rivers flowing to the sea, perfect for exporting grain.
And this attracted a different mix of people.
A much broader range of European migrants, yeah.
Yeah.
English, Dutch, German, Scots-Irish. This led to much more cultural, ethnic, and religious diversity than you saw in New England or the Chesapeake early on.
And maybe more tolerance as a result.
Generally speaking, yes. It wasn't perfect, but there was a greater degree of religious tolerance and diversity.
What about the social structure there? Did it look like the South or New England?
It had its own flavor. In places like New York and New Jersey, you definitely saw an elite class emerging wealthy urban merchants were right at the top.
Okay.
Then below them, you had artisans, shopkeepers, then sort of unskilled laborers, and then vulnerable groups like orphans, widows, the unemployed, and at the very bottom, again, enslaved Africans. So definitely a hierarchy and growing inequality over time.
And Pennsylvania is part of this group, too, founded by William Penn.
Right. Penn was a Quaker, a pacifist.
And did that influence the colony?
Hugely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Pennsylvania really reflected Penn's values. There was official religious freedom for everyone, which was quite radical then. And significantly, their approach to expansion was different. They generally negotiated with Native Americans for land rather than just taking it.
That's a stark contrast to what we saw elsewhere.
A very significant difference in practice, yes. Though not without its own complexities later on, of course.
Okay, one more major region to cover. Let's head south again. But this time also out into the Caribbean, the southern Atlantic coast, and the British West Indies.
Right. Places like South Carolina on the mainland, but also Barbados, Jamaica.
And the defining feature here.
Long growing seasons, absolutely ideal for plantation agriculture.
And exporting staple crops.
Exactly. And a massive reliance on enslaved African labor, even more so than the Chesapeake initially.
Britain actually established its first permanent colonies in the Caribbean before settling some parts of the mainland, right? Like in the 1620s.
Yes, St. Christopher, Barbados, Nevis, these were established quite early. Very warm climate, those long growing seasons.
Initially growing tobacco, like Jamestown.
They did, yes. But by the 1630s, they found something even more profitable. Sugarcane. And sugar production is incredibly brutally labor-intensive, way more than tobacco.
And that's where the demand for enslaved labor just explodes.
Explodes is the right word. I mean, think about this. By the 1660s, on Barbados, enslaved Africans made up the majority of the population.
The majority. In just a few decades. That's staggering.
It is, and the consequence. The planter elites, now vastly outnumbered, enacted incredibly harsh slave codes.
To maintain control.
Absolute control. These codes legally defined enslaved people as chattel, as property stripping them of all human rights.
And this model influenced the mainland colonies.
Very directly.
Yeah.
The colonists who settled South Carolina, many came from Barbados or were heavily influenced by it. They explicitly tried to recreate that West Indian sugar and slavery model on the mainland, initially focusing on rice and indigo, which also thrived there.
So we've painted a picture of 4 very distinct regions, all developing in their own unique ways.
Driven by different goals, different environments, different labor systems.
But you mentioned a hidden commonality earlier, despite all these differences.
Yes. There's this surprising thread running through almost all of them. They developed self-governing institutions that were, for the time, unusually democratic.
How did that happen, given how different they were?
Well, think about the practicalities. Britain was thousands of miles away across the Atlantic.
Right, communication took weeks, months.
Exactly. Direct, day-to-day governance from London was basically impossible. Britain practiced a policy often called salutary neglect, a sort of lax attention, especially early on.
So the colonies just had to figure it out themselves.
Pretty much. They were forced to create their own systems for making laws, levying taxes, managing local affairs.
Okay, give us some examples.
Well, in Virginia, you had the House of Burgesses, established way back in 1619, a representative assembly.
Elected representatives making laws.
Yes, with power over taxes and local laws. Then up in New England, you had the Mayflower Compact, signed by the Pilgrims even before they landed,
Setting up a framework for government.
based on the model of a self-governing church congregation. And this led to things like participatory town meetings where eligible men could directly vote on local issues.
Very direct democracy, at least for some.
For the time, yes. And even in the middle and southern colonies, while elites often dominated merchants in the middle colonies, planters in the south, it still had representative assemblies.
So this shared experience of having to govern themselves, born at a distance, and perhaps British indifference initially.
It created this tradition, this expectation of self-governance across the colonies, even though the societies themselves looked radically different.
This raises an important question, doesn't it? While they diverged so much, this shared political development must have laid some groundwork for what came later.
Absolutely. It's a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
This experience of running their own affairs, even under the British Crown, fostered a political culture that would become incredibly important down the road.
Okay, let's try and bring this all together. What's the big takeaway for you listening to this?
Well, I think the main thing is just how diverse early British America really was.
Right. Forget that monolithic image. Purpose, environment, people, labor, all these things created vastly different colonial worlds.
Mhm.
It's just so clear that not all British colonies were the same.
Exactly. And understanding why they were different, the profit motive in the South, the role of faith and family in New England, the agricultural base and diversity of the middle colonies, the brutal plantation system of the West Indies and Carolina, understanding those foundations is key.
Key to what?
Key to grasping the sheer complexity of early American history and, honestly, how those differences continued to shape the development of the United States long after independence.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Think about how these very different starting points shaped by tobacco or religion or grain or sugar and just plain geographic luck essentially laid down different kinds of DNA for the regions that became different states.
Mm-hmm. You can trace some long-term economic and social patterns back to these very beginnings.
How much do those initial conditions, those very first steps a society takes, continue to echo through centuries? What does that reveal about how societies form and evolve? Something to ponder.